Welcome to Coffee, Coaching, and Callings, a live podcast created for coaches, leaders, and helping professionals that are on a mission to lead a successful and heart-centered life. Your hosts today are myself, Laurel Elders, and Lauren Stidham from the Institute for Integrative Intelligence, where it is our mission to elevate human potential through the art and the science of masterful coaching. Today, we're going to be focusing on our trademark approach, integrative intelligence. And today's topic is the role that coaching plays in the integrative process. And Lauren, since you are a PCC level credentialed coach of the ICF, I'm just excited to have the opportunity to talk more about client integration, because having been a coach at that level, you get to see and witness a lot of integration in your clients. So I'm excited to have this discussion today.
Me too.
And I'm curious, just to kick us off, what are some of the ways that actually becoming a coach has helped you integrate personally?
I think for quite some time before I got into coaching, I had this belief that my inner critic, or in my case, sometimes I feel like I have a panel of inner critics, was a true and real voice for me. And that it was actually like the voice I should listen to the most often. And that was not super productive for me. It led me down a lot of beating myself up, not making progress in healthy ways. And once I really identified the inner critic as part of what was going on, and I began to integrate into my higher self and realized, oh, that's where the answers are. They're actually there. It was super transformative in how I spoke to myself, how I navigated situations, and how I continue to handle different stressful things that pop up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That reminds me just in general in coaching, one of the things that I learned was how in the self-help models, it says, take who you are right now and follow this process and start to grow and move forward. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great, right? People grow, and I started out that way. And in coaching, the coach has us connect with what you were just saying, that higher self. And then all of a sudden the higher self is informing the development instead of who we are, or maybe the ego, right? And wow, what a difference. What a difference getting in touch with that perspective and then moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let's wanted to just give some definition to integrative intelligence. I'm going to share the screen here. But in essence, when we talk about integrative intelligence, especially at the school and in terms of coaching specifically, we are talking about the wisdom that develops from understanding interconnectivity. And that can be on a personal level, that can be in organizational levels, communities, environment. I mean, this to me, the understanding of interconnectivity and how everything is connected it's like a missing link, and one thing I've noticed is a lot of organizations often don't operate through their, how they're interconnected with the bigger whole. They might just be operating linearly. And then we see consequences to that, right? We see the environment being hurt, or the employees not, doing as well because this company's so focused on the bottom line, et cetera, et cetera. And then we see coaches coming in and saying, hey, there's a bigger picture. Hey, we can be successful in all areas. Hey, guess what? Good news. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with the fact that people can get very trapped in what I would consider like black and white thinking. They think they have to focus all their energy in just this area, and that that's where the answer is, or that it's all or nothing. And truthfully, the answers are not really usually found in the black and white. They're found somewhere in the middle. And there are all the different pieces integrated into that middle that help my clients usually find solutions, and companies as well. I mean, again, if they're really able to kind of look at how can they do things that tap into like each area, that's when they start to see the transformative change instead of just focusing on, one very specific area or that real black and white focus.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I also love what John Muir said. He's a pioneering naturalist. I don't know if you read any of his books or um, but he was responsible for really helping to found some of the national parks in the US. He said, when you tug at a single thing in nature, you find it's attached to the rest of the world. And I have not found one area of life that is not true. It seems to apply to just about everything.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of my junior year in high school English when we had to memorize "No man is an island."
Mm, I haven't
Yeah,
heard that
just
one.
oh, the concept is that no man is an island entire of itself, so that if something happens somewhere else in a different place, it impacts where you're at, that we're all interconnected in that way, that no one is just this isolated individual, that we all have this larger connection in the world,
Mhm.
and that we can't ignore that. I couldn't probably recite the whole thing to you, but I remember even in high school that really stuck with me, the concept of how, something could happen somewhere else in the world and it's still connected to me.
Yes, and people get to, I think the more they integrate, the more they're taking blinders off. Like, for example, if I'm like, just think of the term integrative. It is including all aspects when making decisions or, it's including all aspects. So we're not putting blinders on because we are looking at all aspects. So it naturally invites leaders and us, just even as an individual, to rise above and live in the bigger picture if we're not all of a sudden excluding things that are important too.
Mhm.
So from a coaching perspective, we see, in the coaching world, we look at part of our role is to help people accomplish goals and visions in their life. But it's interesting to me that integration is it's kind of like the natural side effect of coaching. It's not always the first purpose, but it ends up happening as the client goes on this journey within themselves. Um, I was thinking about also the Enneagram, the levels of development. You could also say levels of self-awareness, right? And the more growing that we do, the more we're actually integrating all these different aspects of ourself to operate. I would say the more whole person. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're at your healthiest and most integrated with the Enneagram, you have the ability to access all the other numbers and strengths from those numbers. So when you are at that point, you really can take on some traits and strengths that you may not have even realized you had access to. And I think that is absolutely incredible when clients realize that they're not, quote unquote, stuck in a box. They're not, this is not like, this is how you are and this is how you're always going to be. It's the Enneagram is really a framework of possibility. This is the possibility for where you could go when you're integrated, when you're healthy, when you're taking care of yourself, when you're looking at all aspects of your life. Then you really can tap into some amazing gifts and talents that you normally wouldn't be able to.
I love that. I love that perspective on the Enneagram because I know for me and for those listening that haven't heard of the Enneagram yet, it is personality tool similar to Myers-Briggs, but the only difference, what sets the Enneagram apart is that it allows us to connect with the essence of who we are, but also our defense mechanisms that create our personality type, and it gives you a pathway to get out of the defense mechanisms or the box that we can find ourselves in. So it's kind of a shortcut to helping clients self-identify their blind spots so that they can move beyond them and integrate into their fuller self.
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. There's patterns of behavior that happen with each Enneagram type, and they can be very limiting. And so a lot of times in coaching, when my clients become aware of those, they're like, oh, that's starting to happen. I'm seeing some of that showing up in my life right now. It's time to pause and reflect for them and reevaluate what might need to be done so that they can feel more balanced, so that they can feel more healthy. And they can use a lot of those signs as ways to realize they're falling out of integration, that they're not acting as integrated. And then that might mean they need to do more self-care, or maybe it's time to spend a little bit more time in a relationship, or have a spiritual practice that's kind of fallen off to the side, bring that back. So that way they can get back on track to that healthier path that they want to be on.
Mhm. Yeah, I know when I first came across the Enneagram, my mentor, Sandy, she's like, oh, you've got to take this. It's amazing. And I was like, people can't be put in boxes. And of course, my primary type is a type 5, the investigator. I want to know what's the truth. I'm very skeptical. Prove it, I'm that type. And what I found as I got closer into the Enneagram, it's like, oh, we are free. We have freedom of choice. And our defense mechanisms are so predictable because they're patterned ways of being. And the Enneagram, I think, is brilliant because it identifies those 9 different patterned ways of being that are universal for all human beings. It just depends on which pattern you might be in, consciously or unconsciously. But once we become self-aware, we can choose differently. And that's where the integration work comes in, and the levels of development come in. Do you use levels of development in your coaching now?
Oh, yeah. I love the Enneagram. I use lots of resources with the Enneagram in my coaching. But again, as I was saying earlier, if they kind of know the level they're at, that helps them see progress. So we might reevaluate their level of integration 3 months, 6 months in, and they can actually look back and realize, oh, look at this. I'm more aware of this. This particular defense mechanism, I am not implementing it as much. And I've noticed I've made a change here. And so I do find that it's a really helpful tool for tracking progress and continuing to create awareness. And then from that, once you kind of determine, what level of health or integration you're at, it opens up possibilities for what are things you could focus on and work on at that level.
Mhm.
Because sometimes if you're, towards the lower end, there's a lot going on in your life. You're really stressed out. There's certain things that maybe you're not able to access at that point. So it's like, what can you focus on in this moment that will allow you to get to the next level? Now you're there. Now what? It's like you're gradually building yourself up instead of setting some of these, wildly unrealistic expectations that I think we all have a tendency to do. And the world definitely puts on us at times. And so I think it offers a really healthy, okay, here's what's going on. Here's an approach you could take. Try this out and see what happens. And I think that's where growth really happens, when it's at the level you're at and it feels realistic too.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I do want to clarify to those tuning in today is, when we're talking about integration, we're actually not talking about becoming a perfect human being. That's not the goal. The goal is to really, in integrative work, is to expand our capacity to respond to what's coming up. So I took a Tai Chi class in my teens, and the teacher said, true mastery is when you can respond to any situation. And I thought, really? It's not like, I don't know, thought he was going to talk more about Tai Chi, but he was saying, what situations can you not respond to? Do you freeze, or or do you have a reaction to? And I thought, that is fascinating. And so to me, I was making these correlations between the integration work that is done as we're being coached, as we step into coaching, and how that increases our self-awareness so that we can respond intentionally, right? I'm not reacting against, I'm responding in a way that is aligned with my core values, who I really am, right? That true self, the highest self, versus are my fears running the show? Are my defense mechanisms running the show? Who is in charge, right?
Hmm. Yeah, again, that ego and inner critic, right? I tend to think that my inner critic is the one that pushes perfectionism,
Mm,
which is part
yeah.
of why it gets so critical. And again, that's not where I experience growth. And oftentimes, I see with my clients, same thing, that aiming for perfection tends to actually frustrate them and cause them to be stuck more than anything.
Mhm. Yeah. I also love how using the Enneagram, we can see, the levels of development, basically, like how much capacity do I have for growth? So um, if somebody's going through a hardship and experiencing the disintegrated states, which are the lower levels, where we're just under stress and reacting, we're in survival mode. That's where counselors and therapists that are trained and licensed to step in and be of service can really help the person get that agency. And then coaching comes in later when someone is at that place of, you know what, I'm at a place where I'm ready to grow. I have capacity, and what's next, right? Um, I was thinking also about the two journeys. I know you and I have talked about this a lot, where the journeys to potential, that first journey, we can be shown the way through books, teachers, lessons, counselors, mentors, the whole nine yards. But that second journey to reaching our potential can only be taken when we go within ourselves. And that's where coaches come in, because they just reflect back. What's within you? What's within you? Um, so brilliantly. Any
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the more you fall into the coaching world, the more you are around coaches and are coached and experience coaching, the more you really begin to appreciate the coaching approach, and how it empowers you. I know, I was working with a consultant, and we were working through certain things, and he just kept offering suggestions. And I was kind of missing that opportunity to self generate,
Mm,
because some of his suggestions were not resonating with me at all, and others kind of got my brain thinking, and then I was like, ooh, but I didn't have space to actually follow that, like, ooh. Instead, we sort of moved on to what he thought needed to be done. And I remember leaving that particular consulting piece thinking, I think I know more within me than I realized.
mm,
Like, I just didn't have the space or time or right then at that moment to really explore it. And I think that's really awesome when clients get to that point too, where you watch them in the session start to ask themselves questions, right? They begin to kind of know, like, oh, and they are really self-generating and creating. And I think that second part of the journey is a really fun journey to be on as a coach when you're with your client, because at that point you're just creating that space for them,
mm.
and it's really really neat to see what they come up with and where they want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, let me pull up I have an image for this one. And I love this conversation because it is such an example of why I'm such a coaching geek. I'm especially a coaching geek for the ICF's definition of coaching. And here, like, to me, the ICF's definition of coaching it's profound because it honors the client as an expert in their own life. And other definitions of coaching that I've come across haven't necessarily just gone to the heart of the matter. And what's amazing is, like, so looking at that first journey where we can be guided into a potential, if we're missing information, we need a consultant. You can't ask me enough internal questions to get me to understand how to use my computer better. Without a lot of leading, maybe, right? Like, there's a time and place where we need guidance. It's not a negative. And yet, if we stay in that first journey, I mean, you could just see in the graphic, like we just stay here in our, our bubble of potential. But as a coach takes us further into ourselves, right? And then the more pure the coaching, the more masterful the coaching that we can be trained in, the more we're just getting somebody even more in touch with their truth, their potential. It's just pure coaching them to who they really are and what they're capable of. That's what just lights me up about integration and coaching, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what I was referring to, that higher level space. Um, and I have to laugh at the computer consulting. Yeah, definitely not a space for coaching. I mean, definitely consulting has its space in the world and it's really necessary and needed. Um, but I do think there's elements of when you're being consulted, for example, on like your health or your wellness, there is a component of other things going on beyond just like go do this workout and eat this food. There is that part of you and it's all integrated, it's all connected. And when you can explore that in a more coach-like way and the client self-generates and it feels empowered, it's more likely to stick. It's more likely that they'll actually pursue it versus, just being told what to do the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. So I'm just curious, what are some of the indicators that you look for as you're working with the client that kind of demonstrate to you that they're integrating?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I think one of the things that I notice is they catch themselves
Mm.
in thoughts, or they'll be like, oh, that was my inner critic, or oh, wait a minute, no, I've been working on this. Like it while they're talking, they'll catch themselves and then they'll pivot just entirely on their own, which is really, really fun to watch. So it's like a combination of that self-awareness and self-generation. And another thing that I really have noticed with my clients when I feel like they're really starting to integrate is they trying to figure out how to put this into words. It's like they pause to consult their highest self. It's like they pause to determine who they want to be in charge. They don't just rush ahead. They actually are creating that space for themselves and determining, and they'll come back and they'll say like, oh, this happened this week, but I realized that was, my inner critic and it was sabotaging me. So I decided that I would do this instead. And they totally did that all on their own outside of the session. And I love that because I really feel like that's how they're beginning to implement the integration in real life and real situations. And it's
Yeah.
because they created that pause. Like they see something happen, they pause and they're like, wait a minute, is this how I want to go? Is this what I want to do? And then they reevaluate and figure out a way that feels better to them.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I don't know if I shared with you, my coach and mentor, Sandy, she said one day I was beating myself up over something. And I said, why did I choose that? Just so upset with myself. And she said, did you? And I was like, well, of course I did. I'm the only one involved in my life. And she's like, okay, let's think about this. All right. And she kind of walked me through. I was like, oh my gosh, I reacted. I did not choose. I would not have chose that if I would have paused, what you're talking about, pause, got into alignment first, then chosen. Right. I was like, wow, how much of our lives can we live unconscious?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think it's particularly hard in this day and age because everything moves so quickly. There's a lot of speed, expectancy. You can whip out your phone and have answers at your fingertips, and you don't like to wait more than 3 minutes for your coffee. And there is just this element of pausing actually kind of puts you behind the game, when in reality I think that's where you get ahead of the game, is when you pull back, you pause, you reflect, you you readjust, because you can, like you said, move through an entire day and an entire moment in reactivity without even an awareness of what's really going on.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The turtle in the hair.
Yeah.
I've also noticed the inclusiveness that happens. Like what I mean by that is um clients, and I've experienced this personally, of course, too, is that all of a sudden I'm including the parts of myself that I normally would have been like, I don't want to look at that, or don't like it. But including it all, right? Integrative is we're including all of it. The messy, the not so fun, it's all okay. It's all included. It's all a part of the wholeness that we are. And instead of having this push pull go on, like, I don't like that, so I'm going to push against it. There's this invitation to be present with it and see what we can learn about ourselves or about somebody else. I've noticed that also being a really key side effect of the integrative work,
Mm-hmm.
coaching for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah, because true growth, I don't think, is about smashing parts of yourself.
Mm.
That doesn't work. A lot of people try to do that. They try to stomp out these parts of themselves because, maybe they've labeled them as bad, or,
Mm-hmm.
maybe at the time that part wasn't serving them, but in another time it would serve them, but then they've squashed it. So yeah, I agree. It is really kind of accepting that you have all these components within you, and you don't have to operate out of it at that moment if it's not serving you, but
Mm-hmm.
you're more whole when you really incorporate all the pieces.
Right, right. Because even, our defense mechanisms get a bad rap, but they've served us and they can play a positive role if we need them to. It's that whole question of when is something an asset versus when does it become a liability? And when we're aware, we get to choose. We get to say like, oh, this is turning into a liability. I'm getting out of balance. Now I can come back into balance because I'm aware of it versus waking up without realizing, oh, I'm way out of balance too.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's so
It's
fun.
funny that we're talking about this, because I just shared something on my social media last night about it was Venn diagrams, and it was that you could be both joyful and grieving, and that there was
Yes.
a piece in the middle. You can be both kind and direct.
Yeah.
Like this idea that it doesn't have to be either or, that your wholeness, that usually there's something in the middle
Hmm.
that has a little piece of both.
Yeah. Yeah. I know when I talk to people who are just starting to follow like a calling, which can be very intimidating, there's this both aspect to it of I'm excited and scared out of my mind. It's both. And how do those coexist at the same time? And how can we welcome both in so that having too much of that fear doesn't override the excitement? What can the excitement tell us? And yeah, it's including all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd say the other thing I've noticed is, and this isn't always intended, but I have noticed that doing coaching work that people become more heart-centered. Again, that's not always the goal. People might not come into coaching saying, I need to be more heart-centered. Sometimes that happens, right? If there's breakdowns in relationships and whatnot. But, but just having that like living through more of a compassionate, bigger picture perspective. I don't know if you've noticed that as well.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I bought this fun little calendar that had like the heart versus the brain.
I love that
Uh,
calendar. That's so fun.
that author is just, oh boy, does he have human beings and human nature figured out. Um, but I think it's that sometimes our head, we can get so lost in our head and we overthink things. We don't trust ourselves. We get really focused on that logical piece, and we do need both. Again, it's about that overlap. And I feel like when we make decisions with the heart and the head, and they're in alignment, and the heart has a real voice, I think, yeah, we do start to show ourselves more compassion, more empathy. Um, Again, that big picture starts to surface. There's the kindness. there's the understanding. And I mean, I've even been recently, I took a course that talked about how just physically through breathing, having your head and your heart in alignment can dramatically impact your life and how you approach situations, how you have communication with others, your intuition. And so I think not only is it something that we just talk about happening physically, if we can get that to occur in our body, where our heart and our head are connected and there's clear communication and between them, that can just be super transformative as well.
Right, because under stress, they don't communicate as well, right? And yeah, it's more fragmented. And I mean, that's kind of sums up also how we experience life is under stress, we tend to fragment off into like one defense mechanism. And then if we can get back to that place where we remember, no, I've got all these parts. I've got all these parts I can bring to the table. Which one do I want to activate right now? Or which one do I want to engage through right now? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That somatic piece, bringing it all together. So important. Again, whole person.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. This has been amazing. I love talking about integration, and I'm such a coaching geek, so I always love these conversations. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that these messages have been a lantern to your path as you expand your success as a coach, leader, or helping professional. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can always visit us at integrativeintelligence.global. Bye for now.